Hi, welcome to my channel. So today I'm going to be talking about how you can use the Father Ripperger virtue list that has the opposing vices and how that can really help you to determine your predominant fault and vices and ways to combat them. And so at least how I've personally used it, this is not like a formal method. I'm just explaining what I've used and what's been helpful to me. And so what I've done is looked at Father Ripperger's virtue list. It has the 7 moral virtues, and then one version of his list has the contrary vices. So for example, he lists for fortitude, he'll put the definition. So fortitude is the willingness to engage in the arduous. And then under fortitude, there's 6 sub-virtues. So that's magnanimity, magnificence, patience, perseverance, longanimity, and mortification. And yeah, he has the definitions next to each one. So for example, mortification, the willingness to suffer. But it's just also so helpful to see the vices contrary to those virtues. And so if you look at, then there's fear, fearlessness, audacity, presumption, and each one has the definition. And so it's just so helpful. So I'll go through the list and kind of just like put a check mark, or if I've really know that I struggle with that vice, like I'll put an extra check mark or circle it. And also next to the virtues, like I feel kind of like doing okay, or an X next to it if I'm really struggling with that one. But just narrowing it down, and then what you do is kind of like under fortitude, how many did you check off versus justice? And it's not a perfect science because there's, let's see, 6 sub-virtues under fortitude, whereas under temperance there's 17. So it's not a perfect thing, but you'll kind of get an idea just by seeing like, okay, which ones do I really struggle with the most and fall into the most serious sins, versus some might just be more like imperfections. And again, the goal is to root out the predominant fault, because if we do that, I kind of say like, my kids have been into the dominoes, and you know, if you root that one out, like all of them hopefully will kind of be tackled and not as much of an issue. But it's really important to determine what is that predominant fault. And also what I like to do, and this comes from, I've shared before, I use this virtues curriculum for my children, and the nuns that put together that curriculum, part of the method is that they'll ask the kids, well, for that virtue, what does it look like and what does it sound like? And they have them draw a picture. And us as adults can perfectly put into practice those 2 questions. Those are amazing and wonderful if we see ourselves falling into the same sin over and over again. You know, during confession, you know, we're confessing the same sins every week or as often as we're going. What does it look like and sound like to practice that virtue that opposes that vice? And so that's why it's so important to learn about the virtues, so for ourselves, to help ourselves overcome these faults, and also to help others. And so especially for me as a mom, any parents out there, grandparents or spouses, just knowing about which virtues can combat these vices and temptations. So I thought I would try to give an example. So for example, as a mom, like if the kids have been disobedient in this scenario, like I'm struggling with anger, and you know, that's under temperance, and some of the virtues that oppose that are humility and silence. You know, so what does it look like and what does it sound like to be humble in that situation, to be charitable, even though, you know, might be frustrated and angry, and even rightfully so. But what is the most virtuous way to behave in that situation to correct my children? So what does it look like and what does it sound like? So what does it look like? Well, to be recollected, calm, and controlled as much as possible. And what does it sound like? You know, the goal of correcting our children is to teach them, not to vent, not to show them just how angry they made mom. And it's a really important lesson. So all the more reason as parents that we really need to practice and model the virtues and be able to hone in on, okay, if I'm falling into this vice, or if my child is falling into this vice or sin or imperfection, how can I combat it? So I highly recommend looking through Father Ripperger's virtue list, getting familiar with what virtues oppose the vices that you may be falling into, and just honing in on that. And then asking those 2 questions. Well, what does it look like? What does it sound like? Next time, if I need to work on charity, what does that look like with my husband? Or what does that sound like with my children? And you can totally use that also for teaching the kids. And so I just find Father Ripperger's virtue list very helpful for, knowing the definitions of the virtues as defined and explained by St. Thomas Aquinas. And then also this children's curriculum that I made a few videos of in the past, very early on when I started my channel. And I just thought of one more thing that I want to share with you, and that is that in the Father Lassant's book, he talks about making a specific examination of conscience. So that is also a very effective way of combating habitual sin. So sins that we fall into every single day, like very frequently. And so you'll know it if your confessions are sounding, you're confessing the same thing every time you go. And so if you go through this specific examination, it's just so helpful, because then in the morning you're making a firm commitment to combat that specific sin and praying for the graces to help. And by lunchtime, around then midday, you make another examination of conscience, and again renewing that commitment. And for the examination of conscience, you'll still do your general examination of conscience, but also a specific examination of conscience for that particular sin or vice. And then again renewing that commitment. And as you can tell, that is just going to really be fruitful and an effective method for rooting out those habitual sins. So I hope you found this helpful. I always love to hear your feedback down in the comments below. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps the channel. And thanks for watching.